Ok, vamos a estar comenzando ahora. Los que estén afuera en el otro salón, por favor pasen. Everybody that's at the other side, we're going to be starting now. So guys, I'm going to leave you here with Killan, and he's going to be doing his presentation.
All right, good. It is fantastic to be here. I'm super stoked to get to deliver this talk. This is actually the first talk that I ever submitted to a place, and thank you. When it was canceled or when it was delayed, I was terrified that it was going to be pushed back. So the fact that it was really I thought it was going to be canceled instead of just pushed back. When I found out that it was going to be happening, I was pretty stoked. So this is, again, title of the talk. You guys can read it. It's not really saying dismiss domain completely, as I'll go into, but that's the idea. More just stop skipping non-AD hosts. My name is Killan Ditch. Got a quick, easy enough email to remember. I'm a pen tester for Coalfire, not the pizza place, where you do consulting, pen testing, etc. I've been in IT for about 10.5 years now, and the first 8 or so were general IT, software support, sysadmining, that sort of just on-call, deving all the time, having to support, having to do a great deal of phone calls to appease people. Moved to an offensive security consulting role 2.5 years ago, and I have not missed being on call since. It's been great. Can't mention enough. It's fantastic. One of the benefits I think that background has given me is I have a better idea of ways that systems may be misconfigured. As IT, as sysadmin, I know the lazy routes I would take. I know the appeal of using default passwords because they're easy to remember. I know the appeal of, I don't want to patch this yet, it has to stay up. If I reboot it now, somebody's going to be mad at me. I can reboot it later. Well, I can do it later. It happens. So I gained a bit of understanding for that mindset. I think it's really helped me in my offensive security career. Keep forgetting I have this. A little bit of the agenda that we're going to be going through. Quick briefing on what the talk is going to be about. Going to discuss an example penetration test, just go through the common steps that I've seen, that I do. It almost becomes routine in a matter of ways in a standard Windows environment. We're going to be using a PCI DSS example test, just because it's kind of one of standard. People may be familiar with the idea of it. If not, I'll shed some light. Afterwards, going to diverge and discuss how that particular strategy can leave gaps in the coverage of what you're testing. Because it will. If you're focusing only on an Active Directory, anything that's not Active Directory that can't be pinged through a domain controller is going to fall through the cracks. Active Directory. So the standard Windows environment, you've got your domain controller, you've got your Windows domain, domain admin privileges that will, of course, monitor absolutely everything. That sort of environment. It's one of the most standard things that we see, but if everybody focuses exclusively on that, anything that's not in it, as we'll go over, won't be attacked, won't be viewed. Business risk won't be presented. Then, because sometimes it's like, okay, it's just one machine, does it really matter? We'll go over some of the consequences of any single compromised host and what that can mean to a particular business. And while I put the Q&A bit at the end, as I just did, feel welcome to ask any questions as you see fit. I'll try to make it fairly varied depending on your level of experience. Carlos told me that a lot of you are students. That's fantastic. This is exactly the sort of event that I wish I'd had around whenever I had an idea that I was interested in this sort of stuff. So glad to see you here. The briefing part. What is this discussion? as I mentioned, came into the security industry about 2.5, 3-ish years ago whenever I realized that it was around. I'd been doing IT beforehand. I'd had some vague idea of security because as doing IT for students in colleges, I had to clean up machines, you know, fdisk format reinstall, all that sort of fun stuff. So I still feel like a relative newbie to the InfoSec industry. And one thing I've noticed is that some people who have been in the industry, like, entrenched in it, have a very focused mindset. Not disparaging it, merely saying that it can lead to lapses. Anybody can fall into ruts. Anybody can fall into habits. And when you fall into a habit or a rut, you stop being able to see outside of that. Again, not trying to insult, not trying to dismiss the value of an Active Directory Windows domain testing, because it's vital. By itself, Active Directory is not necessarily a vulnerability. It's one of the situations where it can be properly configured. I've been in secure Windows environments where they're properly segmented their admins or admin privileges out. So if somebody needs to be able to install or connect to a computer, maybe they can't install anything on that computer. They can only connect to it. It can be secure. However, the configuration usually needs testing because if every domain user is a member of the local admins group, every domain user can connect to any other machine. That's an issue. So it should be tested. However, I have a firm belief that the current stance on pen testing, especially Windows environments, leads to a almost laser-like focus on getting DA, domain administrator. Get to that highest level of privileges and you are done. You did it. That domain is yours. However, if you then tell that to an executive, like, okay, so you're like one of my sysadmins. You can't keep my systems up. You can't keep my mouse from clicking like wrong. What's the point of that? You have to be able to demonstrate what it means after you get that DA privilege. And some people just don't do that. This is kind of a discussion on why we should venture outside the normal bounds of Active Directory. So, to go through just kind of a relatively vanilla pen test. Got this payment card industry data security standard. This is a standard put forth by, I guess, just kind of the payment card people, the Visa, the MasterCards, the Amexes, where in order for a vendor to be certified, they have to undergo an annual penetration test. And in some accounts, this is a checkbox. Some cases, this is, they know that they have to get a pen test, they want somebody to come, they want somebody to run a scan, they want somebody to give them a clean report, they're good. They pass their report on compliance, no issues whatsoever. However, other times, it gets a little bit more involved. The idea is the pen tester is going to attack the Cardholder Data Environment, CDE. That's where the servers and computers, the payment, the point of sale system, POS system, or POSs, I guess, are located, and they should be isolated. If an employee from their corporate workstation can get to a database where there are credit cards, there is not appropriate segmentation in place. The idea is a tester gets placed in one of those non-CDE networks, and from there, what can happen? Can an attacker, if they get in through a phishing email, if they get in through any of the malware that, for instance, Brad was talking about, can they pivot through the environment and get to those credit card numbers, get to those social security numbers, get to that personal identifiable information or financial data to actually start making money? So testers usually do it one of two ways. Send out a remote device, a laptop, we usually use these drones. They get plugged into a network, or you get to go on site, you plug in somewhere and act like a common user. If you're lucky, you have a desk. If you're unlucky, you get popped into a closet. It happens. Again, goal, you try to get to the CDE. All right. Now, the first step is you've plugged in. Next, you have to find out what's there. A variety of ways of doing this. Now, one of the unfortunate things about it being a kind of financial goal, as it were, is you rarely get to be covert in these matters. If you've got 1 to 2 weeks to complete an engagement and the report, you have to work quickly. So you do run through the vulnerability scanners and the port scanners. Also, at the rate of vulnerabilities that get disclosed, you can't keep them straight. You have to be able to look up a bit faster. And if you ever used exploit DB search, you know how much of an exercise in impatience and exasperation that can be. Your tools like Nessus, Nexpose, and OpenVAS, they help. They fingerprint the services, they identify what's there, and they say, well, if it's this particular version, these are vulnerabilities that have been published for it. Maybe there's an exploit, maybe there's not. At that point, you still have to dig in. You can get a second point of perspective on that from using Nmap and mass-scan. Mass-scan is a really good way to take down a network. It just floods as many connections as possible because it's actually running 2 instances. One is traffic going out, one is traffic listening, and if your client has a fragile router, you will crash it. Great. One point that I didn't put on here, but it's also very valuable for reconnaissance, discussing on the next slide, is just sitting there looking at the network traffic. It's fairly covert, it's passive. You're just sitting there 5 to 10 minutes, get an idea of are there any VLANs? Are you seeing VoIP traffic? Are you seeing SMB protocols? Maybe you can get lucky and see clear text HTTP or FTP credentials, which we'll go into. Just sitting on the wire, getting an idea for the environment can give you really valuable information on how to begin. After you do your reconnaissance and you have a better idea of what's out there, all right, is there a JBoss server? Is there Apache? Do you see one service all across the entire thing? If there's no segmentation whatsoever, can you get to SMB on the data servers? Can you get to any FTP directories that they may have open? Can you see any potential service or opening that you can exploit directly? Go ahead. Correct. On the wire, that is one of the most frequent things that you're looking for. Is if you're not just looking for context to see what's in the environment, you can actively look for credentials. And there are many tools out there that will just sit and sift through network traffic looking for things like credentials. If it gets published somewhere, I suppose so. I currently don't have any plans. One of my later talks this year, I'm going to be putting together a GitHub. I'll probably put it up there. I could expedite that if that is of interest. I haven't really considered it, but yeah, I could probably do that. So yes, initially with the CD stuff, you're looking for open ports, you're looking for vulnerable services. If you can see something, that's potentially the result of poor segmentation. You may not be able to, usually you don't want to be able to see non-management services. You want to see something like SSHN that is supported by, or that is enforcing multi-factor authentication. That way, if you do steal credentials, you have to get onto that jump box. Maybe you have to use a VPN. It's secured in such a way that you can't just RDP to the CDE, dump their stuff. On the other hand, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you will see Windows Server 2003 systems still out there. And if they're not patched, they could have MS-8067. Or the new version, MS-117.010. Also remote code exploitation, remote code execution, where you just connect to SMB, fire off the exploit, and you get a shell. Another way to get a foothold is by getting credentials through network traffic, as discussed. Now, these could be clear text, going through your HTTP, your FTP, just file transfer protocols, or telnet. If somebody's logging into infrastructure devices, if somebody is logging into a point-of-sale system through Pocket Telnet, or Pocket Command, which uses telnet, and you can just see those. You can get a representation of that text completely unencrypted, and you could then log in with those credentials. On the other hand, you could potentially get hashes, password hashes, the representation of a password. So it's not the password itself, but potentially it's the password hash that you would be able to either relay through and just send, or capture it, run it through a password cracker like CUDA Hashcat, or John the Ripper. Hashcat's a little bit better, it can use GPUs. And once you get credentials, then you can start trying to find out what those are able to do. The big point of this is, if you aren't able to get a shell immediately on the CDE server, can you get credentials from the surrounding network traffic? And finally, looking around yourself. What is on the local network that you can see? Can you see unpatched systems of a workstation? Perhaps you are right next to the accounting department, and the accounting department machines haven't been patched since last year because they don't want to turn off their computer. They like to leave it up, they go home, they're able to just maybe connect in. Maybe they have a surveillance camera system on their computer that's on a local workstation that has a file inclusion vulnerability that you can exploit to get a shell on the machine. PCI DSS standards state that pretty much if you can use a machine to get to another machine to get to the CDE, it's in scope. It makes these tests somewhat difficult because it's not just where you are from the vantage point testing the CDE, it's what can you see and what can those see to potentially get to those vulnerable services and ports. If you can compromise a jump box, that'll let you in. Yes, sir. So that's where it gets really tricky, and it's very gray, because you can't really know what a machine sees unless you're on that machine, and it becomes a chicken-egg situation where you kind of have to test to see what it can see, and basically you get a shell, you look at the routing tables, you look to see netstat output to see what it's connected to, and try to kind of worm your way through looking at ARP entries, looking at what's in its various bookmarks. Maybe they've bookmarked a credit card review in .intranet.com, where it's on their internal network, it's not exposed outside, but it's a SharePoint site that they're hosting inside their network. And that's effectively how it ends up going. But if you can, and it usually parallelize your efforts, instead of going step 1, step 2, step 3, you often, all right, while I'm doing a vulnerability scan on the network blocks assigned to the CDE, can I also look around me? I could use NetDiscover to see what's around me in ARP, get an idea running Nmap on those. Are there any exposed SMB services? Are there any? For those, I usually do top 100-ish on an Nmap scan, which is the most common ports that they've determined through statistical analysis, instead of going through all 65,535, or 6 if you include 0. Make sense? Great. Yeah. Between which out? Yes, there are many times where it feels almost like a cookie cutter network, where the same patches are missing, the same services can be configured. Default credentials, I'm a huge fan of. Admin have gotten me into more machines than probably any exploit. Maybe it's a printer. Maybe it's a printer with LDAP credentials on it, and I'm able to set up a listener, and I can connect to it. Maybe it's just a Jenkins server, because people will use Jenkins and JBoss throughout the environments. And you see it once, you see it twice, you see it thrice, you're able to get to it. And so you start being able to see very similar, sorry, that's a camera, I'm walking way out of range. And the idea is you gain familiarity, but only after you've been doing it for a while. Like those beginning ones are rough. You don't have that database. You just have to search for like every service and get an idea. It's slow. You're welcome. So after you get the initial foothold, you start needing to get accounts so you can pivot elsewhere. You can just keep exploiting and exploiting, but that can lead to crashed systems throughout an entire network. The idea of an exploit is you're doing something that it's not expecting. Computers, if they're presented with something they're not expecting, don't necessarily handle things very well. So it's better to get a set of credentials and see what they can do. Multiple ways of doing this. So you can capture the hashes, as mentioned with Responder, great tool, GitHub, other, super useful. And you grab those, you pop them into, password cracking rig. If you got something decent at work, we're lucky enough to have a machine like 7 to 10 970s, which of course became promptly obsolete by the time the machine was delivered, but it still works. If you can't crack the passwords, or really better than cracking the passwords, it's Mimikatz. If you're on a machine and you have the ability to be local admin on that machine, or through your exploit your system on a Windows system, you can dump wdigest credentials from memory. That being said, Windows 10 and Windows Server in 2012 have made this much harder. The setting that stores the credentials in clear text, so you could have 25-character mixed case, never gonna crack password, but if I can log into the machine or compromise the machine and use Mimikatz, it's there in plain text. I can pull it, I can copy it, I can use it. Like I said, Windows Server 2012 and above, and Windows 10, I think it's Server 2012. Apologize if that's incorrect. But I know Windows 10 makes it really annoying. The only way you can make that work is you reset the registry and then force either a reboot or a log off. And when they log back in, they'll type their password and it gets stored in clear text yet again. They just have to say, oh, that was weird, I got rebooted or I got kicked off. Sometimes that'll throw up flags, sometimes it won't. Other point, if you don't want to have to crack the password, pass the hash attacks. Still a valid way to use Windows credentials. If they've reused the local password, the local admin password across the systems, which is a really easy way to roll out a system image. You do your admin, you do example company, so testcorp.inc. That's your company. You do local admin of administrator, and then testcorp summer 2017. That is your password there. But you roll it out across every machine in that domain. As soon as that password hash gets compromised, I don't have to crack it. I can send it through a variety of tools directly to that system, and I will authenticate as that administrator. As local administrator, I can access it remotely. Good enough? All right. So, at this point, quick update on that, however. The Windows has produced tools to let you roll out unique passwords per machines, which you should use that. Helps a lot. It helps defenders, makes my job incredibly harder. So at this point, we've potentially shelled a compromised host, or we've intercepted a set of credentials in some manner. Here I've noticed two primary strategies. One is to go immediately to DA. That is the point, that's the goal, that's what you want to do for that test, right? No, you're trying to prove business risk. However, if you get DA privileges, you can then work down. So you basically shoot up and then look throughout the network for the sensitive data. Because you have that sensitive data access, you don't have to worry once you get it. Sometimes this can happen accidentally. Manage Engine AD Manager is a fantastic front end for managing Active Directory. However, if you leave the default credentials of admin, you get to log in, you can configure a domain account, a domain administrator account, and it will even generate a CSV of servers. So if they're named file server or database server 1, database server 2, database server 3, you know exactly where they are. Really handy. Alternatively, if you just compromise the standard user account, you've got a machine, you've got a regular worker, you can start seeing what they can see. I tend to prefer this route, just because if you're adding users to DA group, sometimes people flag on that, they'll run alerts. Whereas if you're just making a few probes, seeing what file shares you can access, maybe through that machine you can ping the domain controller, start iterating through other users that you may be able to target. And maybe the system you're on has a file server. Maybe it's sharing stuff across the domain to allow other people to access. Maybe it has bookmarks. If you pull up their browser or look through their browser caches and find all of the internet websites, you can still find sensitive data. Just two diverging strategies at that point. The main distinction is that on that one, you've looked around a little bit. So for privilege escalation, because again, if at some point you're going to need to have the authority, the privileges, the rights to access the sensitive services, you need to do three things. You need to connect to targets, you need to get the accounts, and you need to figure out what the accounts are, like what privileges they have. Are they the top level? If not, what do you want? And then of course you just rinse and repeat. Kind of traditional way to do this, using remote desktop, using PSExec, using kind of the native tools that are there, fairly traditional, net use. You connect to them, you use your Mimikatz, use hash dump, you get the account credentials, then you can do the net user commands and just figure out what groups they belong to. If they belong to DA group, good job, you've got that. If they belong to an IT administrator group, you've got more privileges. You may not have all of them, but you're going to have more. And you just rinse and repeat, and you go to every machine. Now, one issue that this presents is, what if you're in a university? That's a lot of machines to hit up. So some enterprising people come up with tools. The newfangled Privesc and tools that we use, I have the privilege of working with a very talented individual named Marcello Salvati, goes by BiteBleeder. He created this tool called CrackMapExec, CME, where it does all three of those things. You can use it to connect to targets with a set of credentials. You can then iterate through, you can't see it right here, but, oh, I've got this. It's got a little plus. Newer versions has, you say, pwned. The importance is that you can indicate what access you have on that machine. If you're local admin on a domain controller, you are domain admin. You can also use Mimikatz modules to dump credentials remotely. You don't have to get a shell on the system. You can remotely get those credentials off the system. So 1, 2, 3 steps, you're done. It makes it incredibly easy to do. Yes? There is absolutely more than one way to do your job, and that is almost the fundamental rule of pen testing, is that there should be more than one way to do it. Now, you can make it easier or harder, and some people prefer to, if it can be automated, it should be automated. Some people like to stay hands-on, run through things a little bit more frequently, get a little bit more granular, and variety basically spices up almost every pen tester's repertoire. As many as you can think of the systems. So, I mean, so it's going to take a different set of approaches within an overarching methodology. You've got your recon, you've got your exploitations, you've got your pivoting. Same overall methodology, but the refinement, like, how many variations of Linux are there? It's kind of how many variations of a pen testing style somebody could have. Some people will only write their own tools. Other people will only use others' tools. So, it's very robust. You're welcome. So, going along those lines, as I mentioned, so now you've got a more expedited way of finding credentials, getting accounts. Still, if you're in a university or an enterprise, like a really large enterprise business, you've got hundreds of thousands of potential computers to go through. It's massive. How do you try to find out the DA sessions? Do you do blind luck? Just try to, all right, connect to every one that's in a .17. Great. Maybe you try to hit every machine. You can't do that in a bigger machine. So Microsoft handily provided a tool through which to do this. PowerShell. Yes, precisely. It is a fantastic system management tool, which, just like the Manage Engine AD Manager, means that it's a great attack tool. Because sysadmins make great pen testers because you know how to manage the systems. You know how to manage the networks. Once you're into a network, you effectively want to manage it for a particular goal, but you need to manage it. Now, PowerShell, question? Oh. PowerShell itself is great, but of course, people always want to make things a little bit better. So there are a number of tools that have been released using PowerShell. I'm going to go over a couple of those. Again, this is newfangled perv-esque. PowerShell Empire, another really useful tool out there. It's got a ton of modules, just absolutely. You can, if you have a PowerShell session on a machine, which you can get through a phishing email by sending as a macro to tie into Brad's talk, you can send a spreadsheet where the macros, if they are enabled, will run a PowerShell launcher out to your command and control server, and you have put a rat on that machine effectively. However, the one that is most pertinent to this situation is Invoke-UserHunter or Invoke-StealthUserHunter. The difference is where they enumerate the users. What it gives you is you give it the username that you want to target. So after you've determined, maybe by dumping the domain admin's group, you know the members of it. Where do they have sessions? This gives you the username. This gives you the computer into which they are logged, and if they typed in their password either at the keyboard or through a remote desktop, and you can connect to it, you'll be able to dump those credentials. And it gives you the computer that they have the active session from. Once you know what computer they're on or at, you can connect to that one, and in turn, you dump those credentials, you can do a keylogger, you have domain admin privileges at that point. So it speeds up the, you don't have to go through every machine from 105 to 205. You can just target 105 and 205. Another option, which uses Empire and PowerSplit on the back end, is Bloodhound. I find that the main use of this tool is providing an attack path for especially executives, managers, people who don't necessarily understand what all the text on a black console background means. If you can give a graphical map of, I was here, and I was able to compromise this machine, and it was in turn connected to this machine, which was over here on the server, that's how I was able to escalate privileges. It allows for people to get a little more context. And that's just a little blurb from their GitHub. Both, or actually, PowerShell Empire, CME, and Bloodhound are all hosted on GitHub. They're open source, great tools to check out to start learning a lot about this stuff. Both the UserHunter and the Bloodhound queries rely on Active Directory, and in the background, they're running a ton of queries. They hit up a domain controller, they iterate through all these standard PowerShell Active Directory management functions to present the information you need. Key there being, of course, they're using Active Directory. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with the ability to escalate to DA is incredibly fast. It is, you get that initial shell, you run your Invoke-UserHunter, you know where they're logged into, you use CME to dump the creds from that, you have a domain administrator account. It's that easy. Marcello actually created an automated way of doing this. Like I said, some people like to automate everything if they think it can be done. He pops this in, it runs now. While yes, it results in DA account, if you have too many lockout, or if you have a restricted login, amount of times that a failed login can happen, sometimes it'll kick off that and you'll lock the account. If you have any monitoring at all, you'll see this because it's noisy. It's going out there, it's running a ton of queries. Anything that's really automated has to be like, it's a shotgun that shoots shotguns as its pellets, which in turn shoot shotguns as their pellets. It's noisy. You're going to be able to see it. So you are absolutely on point here. One of the things that these tools are best for are actual penetration tests. They differ from either red team engagements or actual attacks in that if we get caught, we don't go to jail. It's the best thing about this. Don't do illegal hacking. Become a pen tester, and you get to do it and get paid for it. Pretty much. This is more a proof of concept of, in a misconfigured Active Directory environment, this is what can happen as a result of that. If you were being stealthier, you could go from computer to computer using things like NetUse or maybe local tools instead, running targeted queries, delaying them, spreading them out over time, because you are correct. As soon as they see something this noisy, they can look for an unknown connection out, and if they kill that CNC command, you've lost your shell. You've lost your foothold. This may be running in the background, but you'll never get the data off of it until you get them with another fish, potentially. So yeah, it's very important to separate the dichotomy here. Is sometimes we have, if we're lucky, 2 weeks. More frequently, it's a week. Get in, try to do this, get the report out, move to the next. Precisely. It's, again, a proof of concept, and if it really is more to illustrate this is what can be done. It will not work on every environment. Usually it takes, it's a lot like Legos, in that we have all these tools, you have all these blocks, and if you put them together, you can get a structure. This is you giving the Lego set to your 3-year-old and saying, build it. They'll build a structure, but they're going to be leaving pieces for you to step on, which you could call artifacts. It's going to be messy. They're probably going to scream, maybe chew on the pieces. It's going to be a mess. So yeah, it's that sort of situation. Oh, by all means. It absolutely could. It absolutely could, especially with how you could fire that and then be on a completely different machine. If they lock down the domain entirely, you're still lost. However, if you are not, if they just patch it, as in slap a Band-Aid over, oh, this machine's doing a bunch of noise, let's go ahead and take it off of the network, they'll be focused on doing incident response on that and may not see the other threads that you have going. Solid question. So, oh yeah, go ahead. Defense? Yeah, one of the great things is you could run this on your own network. If you're a defender, if you're a sysadmin, run this on your own network, see the results. Make your changes, make your configuration changes, run it again. If it still works, continue making changes. That's one of the purposes of the pen tests, is we're an external party doing these tests in order to better their security. By showing them these vulnerabilities, they then patch, they become more secure, and the next year it should be harder. You're welcome. So yeah, with it becoming this easy, kind of this fun, it's almost like a video game where you just type go and you have it, some testers will focus exclusively on getting DA. They don't do anything else. They're just, all right, I got that. That's all I need to do. The purpose of a pen test is to prove business risk. It's not just to say, hey, I got another one put up on the board. It's to show that it matters. They're not cheap. People want to be able to get their budget next year. They want to be able to show that it matters to have these done. And a report that just says, got DA, is not going to be very helpful. The other result, if it's not Active Directory, does it matter? Not really, because you're not going to be able to run Bloodhound, you're not going to be able to run Death Star, you're not going to be able to run Empire on it. So, also, quick side note, apparently everybody loves Bloodhounds because it was really hard to find a picture of a no Bloodhound, which I just went with the Terrier. I even looked for Bloodhound Gang and couldn't find it. Going to have to cut this rant a little bit short, but this slide is a representation of a conversation that inspired this talk. It was between two pen testers, and someone was like, oh, I popped a box. You know, used MS-08, 067, I'm great. Oh, but it wasn't on the domain. And someone was like, oh, it's not on the domain? Doesn't matter. Move on. Next. They didn't do a single thing other than some variation of finding the domain. They didn't look on it for password. They didn't see if there were any files with password text. They didn't see if there were any listening services or services it was connected to. They didn't see if it had any file shares. They didn't run a quick packet capture to see what it was connecting to, what it could see from its perspective. None of that. It was just pop on, check the domain, not it, done. I find that's not doing due diligence, and I find that that can miss a lot of information. With Meterpreter these days, it is a fantastic tool for doing every single one of these. Once you get a Meterpreter shell on, which is Metasploit's pretty fancy shell, you can do file system searches. It's really robust. It's relatively fast. Not super fast, but relatively. And you can do searches for password. You can do searches for credit cards. You can do searches for SSN, and it will find these things. It has a netstat. It has a PS. It has these abilities to look at the system in a very short amount of time. Also, really cool, it can run a packet capture. You don't need to upload Wireshark. You don't need to upload T-Shark. You don't need to do anything with that. You just run the post-exploitation module in Meterpreter, and then you transfer the file, the packet capture over to yourself, and you get to look at it. It's really easy to do. So yeah, the question I ask instead is, why aren't these machines members of a domain? Why aren't they on the domain? Is there a reason? You don't know until you bother looking. The cheap one that I'm going to throw in there is not very many Linux environments have Active Directory on it. Sometimes they'll use LDAP, some variations where the similar principles are there, but I mean, it's there. And if somebody's just focused on, all right, I get in, I run my initial foothold, I run responder, I get, or NTLM relay where I don't even have to crack the password, I get the shell, I use those creds in CME or UserHunter, I get DA, I'm gone. Too much focus on that methodology makes one rigid. You get too structured, and whenever you get into a different environment, like Linux, you stop looking for things like SSH keys, reviewing bash histories, looking for the services that they have. You stop gaining that momentum and that ability to adapt to the situation. S3 buckets, that's one thing I wanted to note there, is a lot of Linux machines have hookups to S3 buckets where you pop that box, you get into their Amazon systems, and if you've been paying attention to the news at all over 2017, like exposed insecure S3 buckets were one of the themes, like ransomware and that. Another reason, infrastructure devices. You're not going to have many infrastructure devices on it. The routers, the switches, these management devices, where if you get a shell through a file upload, through default credentials on a router, you can direct all the traffic to wherever you want. That matters. You could potentially change DNS servers so that all the lookups go to your machines, and then you proxy it through. Phones. Polycom phones, great systems. Some of them even have the ability to take packet captures, where you go into the little web interface that they have, usually again, Sometimes password 123 on this one, switching up a little bit, but still default credentials. You can get on it, and sometimes there's command injection on them as well, because they'll have little troubleshooting machine utilities that let you do diagnostics. Sometimes you can get command injection on those. So if you can capture the packets of a VoIP call, you can recreate that phone call and listen in on it. If you're in a law firm and you can capture a confidential phone call between the client and the lawyer, you have access to anything talked about in that call. Things like badge and door controls. Sometimes those aren't on because they want to be actually air-gapped. If they're truly, well, they're not going to be truly air-gapped. They're just not on the domain, but that's air-gapped, right? And once you're in there, maybe you could flip switches. Maybe you could open doors that wouldn't be there. Maybe you could print a badge. Maybe you could enable a badge that you have. Different things to look at. Another one, forgotten servers, just machines that are out there that nobody realizes. I feel like half the pen tests I've done were inventorying, where they're like, oh, we didn't know that was still there. Therefore, it wasn't getting patched. Therefore, it wasn't getting updates. Therefore, it wasn't getting secured. Nobody cared about it. Say again? It is a vulnerability because if they don't know about it and it's unpatched, then it could have legacy data. So as a continuing, if they were redoing their domain, they wanted to switch from Test Corp Inc. to just Test Corp.
That's very interesting, the point, because I work with one in a project that they have several servers, and I find out they were still using one empty server that was connected directly, but the only thing you have to do is get into the NT and then go inside and go.
Yes.
Nobody knew where it was located, even physically.
If you don't know where it is, you don't know the network dialog. It is. One thing to say about the older machines, they also don't let you use PowerShell unless you put it on the system. PowerShell being a default install, you have to put it there. So yeah, if there are any legacy devices that haven't been updated, or maybe they belong to an old domain, nobody knew where it was, nobody knew where, if they rebooted it and it didn't come back up, where's the power button? Where's the machine with the power button to turn it back on? Acquisitions. Maybe a company buys another company, they're in the process of merging thing over, they haven't synchronized domains yet. So it may still be part of an Active Directory, but it's not part of the company's Active Directory. And therefore, any security policies or hardening guidelines that were supposed to be applied to it haven't yet. And it could have information about that acquisition, which is very similar to the affiliate. Things like the target breach, that one of the things that happened the years that I started to get into security, it came in through a vendor, it came through an affiliate. If I'm a business and I want to have a company have access to my network, I may not let them be a part of my domain, but I may give them like a VPN endpoint. And that way we can talk. If I compromise that machine through just like raw network traffic and I'm able to get to it, I could get into that vendor potentially. Or if I'm pen testing the vendor, I could potentially get into its affiliates. And one of the final things for ways of paying attention, rogue hosts. This shadow IT phenomenon that has been kind of recently labeled. It's not a recent phenomenon, it's just getting a recent label. Is machines that people bring in, devices that people stand up without approval from IT. They're like, oh, I needed a hotspot, so I brought mine in. I needed a desktop machine, so I just plugged it in. My buddy has this laptop that's way better than mine. I'm going to bring this in and use it instead. These machines may not be on the environment, but they're a computer in a network. It matters. Files are on it. It's doing something on that system. Developers are really bad about this. So are security people. We both like to spin up virtual machines to either do developer environments, check out source code, check out intellectual property. As a security person, maybe I want to detonate a payload. Like Brad's job is just detonating payloads like all day. You spin up VMs to do that, and if you forget to take them down or forget to have it be host only, it could be effectively having a foothold on the network. And VMs don't always get updated. Therefore, it could be an unpatched, vulnerable system that's not on the domain, but still a foothold on that network. Also, devs like to keep text files of passwords. Just maybe they'll name it password, maybe they'll name it credentials. They'll have it on their desktop. It's a great way to find out either how to use their software, find their email, find out just all sorts of great information. So what can be done with one machine? Why does it matter? So what? There's a fluke. Everything except one machine is on the network. Big deal. Couple things. One, it could be used as an attack proxy. I could, just like I was pivoting from one foothold throughout the network, pivot through your company to attack another secondary target. Any attribution that they're doing is going to find your source IPs in their logs. And of course, the variety of things, they're going to say, hey, why are you guys attacking us? They could publish something saying, so-and-so was attacking us. There was recent legislation about allowing companies to hack back, as in attack those they see attacking them. If I'm proxying through company A to attack company B, and company B's IR team's like, all right, they start attacking company A. And company A is like, WTF people, we didn't do anything. Like, actually, I just popped a shell in this box and somebody's doing something. You can get attacked by people. And so therefore, it's kind of an attack from both sides, really. Somebody could spin up a Tor endpoint. Again, it's like an attack proxy, only everybody who's using Tor to proxy through to hide their traffic and anything that, there are legitimate uses for Tor. Do not take this as a slander against that. However, there are a number of illicit uses for Tor, and if someone were using that, again, source traffic is going to find your external IP address in their logs. And forensics comes in, they're like, hey, this dude was looking at this stuff. It says it right here. Until they start looking a little bit deeper and realize that potentially someone was proxying through it. And tried and true storing wares. If they can use it as a file server, maybe they'll use it as a seed box. So that way you can get a bunch of torrent traffic out. If they want to use it a little bit more sneakily, they'll just sell it as, hey, I've got files up here, really good, games, music, whatever you're looking at. If I've got a compromised host and you're never looking at it because it's not on the domain, you may not see connections to it, data coming out from it. And if it was reported, if someone was like, hey, we got this strange, weird stuff from your company on this machine, the company's then going to have to go through the legal process of proving that it wasn't them. It wasn't them, it wasn't them, swear it wasn't them. You're going to have to roll IR, you're going to have to figure out ways to prove that that wasn't you. And of course, as is the topic, cryptocurrency. I mean, one machine mining, not going to do too much, but you never know. If you had compromised a machine in, 2015, mined like 0.1 Bitcoin, given that 0.045 was like $500, you'd be rolling in it now. If you'd cashed out whenever it was $19,000 per Bitcoin, you could have made a lot of money on that. More importantly, maybe it's a server that everybody forgot about, but it had a copy of their backup database. Or maybe it had the only existing database. Maybe it was that one machine that was pivoting that allowed direct access. You put ransomware on that machine, you get a payday, because then they're like, oh crap, that machine mattered. And now we have to shell out $500,000, $2,000 to get that back. In summation, you can't know host value until you look at it. And looking takes so very little time. The tools these days make it incredibly easy to just do a quick grep, quick find, quick search, and then move on. But bother to look. DA should be a means to an end, a means to finding that data. You want results. You want to find something to compromise. You don't want to just get that highest level. It's nice to help you look further, but it should not be what it's after unless it's a different type of test and the client just like, get to this point, once you get to it, stop. Don't want you looking at any of our stuff. Don't want you seeing that. Don't want you having that. Just see if you can get that high. The client gets to define the objectives. As I hope you guys picked up, defenders should be looking at any non-AD members as well. If you're relying on Active Directory to defend your network, consider what's not getting defended, what's not getting patches rolled out to it, what's not getting those updates, because you have to connect to it manually. You have to do it as an individual system. You gotta watch out for these things. So, we've had a fair number throughout, and we've got some pretty good conversation, maybe a little bit of time, probably not too much. Any follow-up, wrap-up, thoughts, questions, discussions? Changing the local domain admin password? Yes. Yes. Potentially, but that is the one I was thinking of and couldn't quite get my search to work out to get me back. Lapse. Admin password. Yeah, that is correct. Microsoft published Lapse, which is the one I had a lapse in memory. I shouldn't have done that. I'm really sorry. And that's one that allows you to change local administrator passwords so that way you're not reusing it across the domain. Good point. Anything else? The end game for which? Okay, so the endpoints are usually defined by the client. In regards to the pen test I was describing, it was to get credit card numbers, get example social security numbers, actually compromise their databases. Maybe they run an application that takes payment processing. You want to try to find that sensitive stuff. And then once we report that, the client patches the systems to try to address it. Yep. I don't know if it's ever not going to be that way. I think that there are a lot of automated solutions coming out that are going to help. But as long as there's data out there, somebody's going to be trying to get to it. And we at least try to help people find out ways that people could get to it. You're welcome. So mostly on-premise. That being said, a lot of the cloud stuff that I have tested makes the stuff I do much more difficult. Just because if you're using platforms as a service, they're usually patched, they're usually maintained. Sometimes they take care of all of that base layer security, so that way you're only dealing with that kind of surface level, and those can help harden the environment ridiculously. I've used been testing mostly local and on-prem stuff, but a lot of the application tests that I've done, I would say at least a third were all in one of the like AWS, Azure, those types of cloud environments. See, now that's taking things into a really fun direction, because if you're able to rise above the automated pen testing, yes. Currently, they are running CTFs at some of the conferences where they have some artificial intelligence and they've programmed it to attack a machine that has been programmed to defend itself. So it will do these things. It will run a vulnerability scan by itself. By the results of that, it will attempt to compromise things. If, like we've proved with Empire, or the Death Star, that can be automated. So if you can continue to keep with up the new vulnerabilities, doing the research, getting an idea for legacy systems that aren't going to be patched until 2035, 2045, yes. I think it's going to become a lot harder though. I think that the current configurations are getting much more secure. Like SMB signing is getting rolled out as potentially disabled or enabled. You check on that. But the W digest is a perfect example. Mimikatz is getting a lot harder to use. Things are getting more difficult. I think it's a ton of fun. I definitely plan on trying to keep on, sticking with it. And then somebody's going to come up and be like, "Hey, you haven't heard of this new technique?" And we're like, "Well, maybe it's time to retire." But good one. Like a fake. So sometimes we're put in a non-prod environment. More frequently than not, we are testing like their active databases, which means that if you crash that system, that's when you're on call and you get very angry people.
As your experience working as a domain administrator, do you know any software that uses artificial intelligence for monitoring the domains?
Okay.
You know, maybe something about out there?
So what I mainly use in my time was Spiceworks and Nmap. I would run frequent Nmap scans across the net blocks that I knew, kind of keep things up, see the results, see anything that came back. And Spiceworks was our technical, that was what we were supposed to be using. It wasn't necessarily so hot, but PowerShell, like there are a number of default PowerShell modules right now that help with maintaining and keeping inventory.
The problem is that you know that after 1,000 lines of code, it's impossible to get a bug. Imagine how many policies a domain server has. Not only domain, user policies, how many switches and tweaks that you have to check to see that the domain is secure. It's impossible.
It is.
And then you have the routers. They are probably you're working against time. You're working with the pressure with your client. So actually, it's a lose-lose game.
If you think of it as you have to fix everything right now, it is. Incremental progress. Every one you find, every one that you fix, hey, that one machine didn't have a patch, you reboot it. That, in my opinion, is a win. Every time you do that, it's a win.
The problem is that when you find that problem probably it's already compromised.
And there it is, of course, that position. It's entirely possible that when you find that little win, it turns into a, oh no, someone's been on this box. We don't know when, we don't know how long. And then it can just cascade down. All right. It's a mixed bag. Sometimes they like to not tell people and see how they respond. Do they see anything? Are they doing their jobs? Other times, we find that if they are told and as a system goes down, it could be a user just tripped over the power cable. You immediately get an email and a phone call saying, "What did you do to this system?" Because they're like, "What's changed in our environment?" Somebody's in there testing. That being said, given the number of systems that I have crashed, sometimes it's me, but more frequently it's not. It just happenstance.
How about privacy protocols? Sometimes if you enter a machine from someone with their email, they are compromising.
Yes, that is one of the things that we try to define in our rules of engagement, in our charter calls, of how far can we go in testing like international clients. You have to be aware of their laws as well, because in the US, if you're an employee, you don't have privacy, you are the employer. In places like the UK, it's much more, and Europe, like